who are going to it immediately. Now, that's for the moment, but this of course leaves open the question of whether another shoe will drop and whether there will not be a second and deeper phase to the crisis which these developing countries cannot withstand, which I think, because of the international interlinkages involved, which are various and which we could discuss, is certainly one that could hit a number of these countries quite severely and change what is a story of an ambiguous and a rather mixed empirical situation into one which involves much more of the reality, consistent reality of global depression. Okay, so let me just conclude, given that I'm out of time, by saying that if and when this second shoe does drop, the increasingly multipolar global economy will place unprecedented global difficulties or new difficulties in managing the crisis. Just one example, and again, there are many to be provided, is the difficulty that the United States will face in the intermediate and long term in preventing serious dollar decline with all of the implications that has for U.S. living standards and U.S. domestic growth, while providing stimulus over an extended period. The United States may, to put it boldly, have to maintain a high rather than a low interest rate regime in order to defend the dollar, and it may have to choose in a much more direct way than it has done so far between these options or these goals. And there will, in that event, be no alternative to a globally coordinated response which will involve elements of conflict as well as cooperation between the countries involved. And it may be more difficult than ever to achieve the cooperation which is required. I haven't said very much about distribution, but perhaps we can talk about that in due course. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay. I'm very happy to introduce another member of our department. Lopa Mudra Banerjee is Assistant Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research. She completed her doctorate at the University of California, Riverside in 2007. Her fields of study are the interface of the environmental system and the development process of an economy. She is also interested in the analysis of risk perception and bounded rationality in the procedural aspects of decision-making in the presence of environmental hazards. She is presently a fellow at the India-China Institute, where she is examining the political economy of river management in the case of state-implemented multi-purpose river valley projects in India and China. Please help me to welcome Lopa.
Thank you for having me over here. And I should like to start by thanking the students over here. Like my other colleagues in the panel, I start by thanking our students in organizing this panel and this conference. And thank you really for being what you are, being interested in all these issues. And thank you for the potentials of what you have, what you can be. I shall talk about, very briefly, about the crisis and the role of the state in managing crisis. Those should be the two big points for my discussion. I start by this quote. In his keynote address delivered at the high panel discussion of the 48th session of the United Nations Commission of Social Development on February 3rd. I have nothing to show, so you might. Yes. I'm quoting Hime Adesina, who noted that the current economic crisis triggered by the subprime mortgage in generating another round of social and economic crisis and acute vulnerability in the world's poorest regions. The recent estimate by the World Bank, this has come out in the World Development Indicators in 2009, suggests that an additional 46 million people will fall into severe poverty. Additional 46 million people. An additional 53 million people will become poor. It is also estimated between 200,000 and 400,000 children will die annually if the crisis continues, and that about 1.4 million to 2.8 million new cases of child mortality between 2009 and 2015 will figure. That economic deprivation increases vulnerability to income shocks, like the current crisis, is neither profound nor perplexing. The poor households find it more difficult to adjust to a given loss of income than the non-poor. The poor are also less capable of taking protective measures against risk. So even those who stand to lose more in the time of crisis in absolute terms, they have not stand to lose more in relative terms. And yet, the crisis that suddenly emerges as an exogenous shock in the economic firmament should not come to us as a surprise or an unexpected random occurrence. And Anwar has specifically talked about this issue when he talked about the crisis of profitability at the core of a capitalist system and how accumulation-driven systems inevitably are unstable, and so this crisis is an inherent part of the system itself. So it should not come as a shock to us or an unexpected phenomena to us that this thing is actually realized. It is in the very nature of the market economy that there can be an ex-ante mismatch in demand and supply. Systemic error that is endogenous to the market system can actually occur when this mismatch occurs. Even the theory acknowledges the existence of this fundamental uncertainty in the market economy, where the buyers do not know the sellers at the time of making their consumption decisions, who the buyers are going to be, and the sellers do not know the buyers at the time of taking production decisions. The entire economic history since the inception of market capitalism can be read as a biography of this mismatch and how nation-states struggle to align the forces of demand and supply. Indeed, we can extract a theory of cyclical determinism or pendulum shift from Polanyi's historical account of double movement, the movement being from economic liberalism to protective regulation. Traditionally, it had been the role of the welfare state to act as a regulator, to ensure that if there is excess supply, the government should step in to ensure that the demands are geared up. Alternatively, if there is excess demand, there is a resource constraint. This demand is geared down. This is, in a sense, the policy suggested by John Maynard Keynes. The demand management policies could work perfectly well in the golden age of capitalism in the post-World War II, especially in the United States. In an economy with high growth potentials, this business of deficit financing and demand promotion can act very well. But as Kalischke precisely predicted as far back as in 1943, national Keynesianism as a model can only work within a definite time-space framework. Over the long time, it would lead to either wage inflation, and over long space, consumption or demand-driven policies would lead to ecological disasters. This is the nature of the beast, and it is at best a lapse of our collective memory and at worst deliberate obfuscation of reality if we forget about this fact. And I suppose Sanjay touched upon this issue when he talked about this collective sense of cognitive dissonance when we forget about these things, that this is the very nature of the unstable system that we're talking about. At each moment of crisis, the welfare state has sought to bring back balance from imbalance through distributional mechanisms. Through this redistribution, the state has fulfilled its role as a regulator by maintaining the economic and political stability of the system. Through this, the state fulfills its own side of the promise in the social contract. Basically, this is an effort to integrate the economy back to the social relation from which it has disembedded. The dichotomy between the market and the state is therefore a false dichotomy in this respect. And once again, Anwar has talked about how state takes sides of capitalists at different points of time and side of labor at other points of time and so forth. David Westbrook, in his new book, uses ecology as a metaphor in explaining this kind of thing, and says that we should think about markets not as a jungle but as an ecology, as a metaphor, and says that we should consider this marketplace as a space of both planning and necessity. He also uses the metaphor of market economy he also uses this other metaphor where market economy is considered to be a structure integrated by tension, in which the elements of demand and supply pull against each other, and the structure remains as long as the tension between the two forces are tight. State as a regulator ensures